Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video we're going to be analysing the poem Penguin on the Beach by Ruth Miller. So firstly, a little bit about our poet. It's always important to know about the poet so that we can understand the context of the poem. So Ruth Miller was a South African poet who lived between 1919 and 1969, and she worked as an English teacher and a secretary, as well as being a poet and a writer. What I find interesting about Ruth Miller with regard to this poem is that she lived, during the 20th century, during the first half of the 20th century. And when we think about the theme of Penguin on the Beach being about, global warming or climate change or humans' bad impact on the environment, we typically think of those sort of ideas as being very contemporary and very modern. But these sort of environmental disasters and the concern with the environment actually has deeper roots than maybe we might expect, right? Because this is a topic that is coming up in poetry written in the 20th century already. Penguin on the Beach. Stranger in his own element, sea casualty, the castaway mannequin, waddles in his tailored coattails, oil. Alright, so if we have a look at our first stanza, or actually if we just go back to the title for a second, the title in itself, Penguin on the Beach, is quite positive connotations. When we think about that title, we imagine the sort of penguin on the beach enjoying himself, and so that's a really powerful thing that we've got this idea in the title of it being a really positive poem, and then immediately from the first line, stranger in his own element, we've got this contradiction, we've got this paradox, because this penguin is not, this cute penguin on the beach having fun at all. This penguin is traumatized and suffering from PTSD. So that's a really interesting idea of putting that title there, and the title of the first line creating this contradiction. So in the first line, we have stranger in his own element. So this line in itself is paradoxical, it is a contradiction, because being a stranger means that you are out of your depth. And it says here that he's a stranger in his own element. So what that means is that the penguin is looking like he's a stranger within his own habitat, within his own environment, within his home. And as you can understand, that's quite a contradiction, because you're not supposed to be a stranger in your own home. And as we read, we're going to find out the reason why he feels like a stranger is because of human negligence and because of the human's impact on the environment. The negativity continues into the second line. Sea casualty, the castaway mannequin. So notice the alliteration of the C sound here, this harsh C sound of casualty and castaway. And this alliteration, the harshness of this alliteration emphasizes the harsh contrast to what we typically think of the sea, right? Or what we thought of this penguin on the beach initially being all great and lovely. Now we can understand he's a sea casualty. This is a harsh environment. A casualty is a victim. Castaway means something unwanted. And a mannequin is like a little man. And this is a really important idea, and it's going to lead into the next line as well of waddles in his tailored coattails, because mannequin and tailored coattails, these are very human images. And so by putting the penguin and sort of comparing him to a human, the speaker is trying to create empathy within the reader as they read, so that they can understand the plight, the struggle of the penguin on a deeper level. Waddle, if you think about waddling, penguins do typically waddle, but now the fact that the penguin's being described as a mannequin in tailored coattails, it is a bit of a strange thing to think of, because you're thinking of a person almost waddling. And in his tailored coattails, so if you think about a penguin, they do look like they are perhaps wearing coattails, but they're black and white feathers. But as I said earlier, this idea of creating the penguin, putting it in the image of a human to really create empathy within the reader. We then have a full stop in the middle of the line, and this is called caesura. Caesura is this sort of unnatural stop in the middle of the line, and we're going to see here we have the first word of the new sentence coming on the end of this last line of the first stanza, and it seems very misplaced. Why is the word oil just right over there? And so it's important to note that The caesura creates a sense of unnaturalness and harshness to show us that what the penguin is experiencing as a result of this oil spill that has occurred, which has been the fault of humans, right? Humans are the ones who've caused this oil spill, who have deprived the penguin of his habitat, of his home, of the sea, of his safety, of his comfort. Um, that this is unnatural and it shouldn't be happening. And then when we have this oil that links to the second stanza of oil has spread, that is an example of enjambment, those run on lines. And that enjambment can show a couple of things. So, firstly, it can emphasize, remember in poetry, whatever poetic technique is used is usually there to emphasize some sort of messaging or some sort of theme of the poem or what the speaker is trying to relate. So it shows how the oil is continuously, spreading all throughout the sea. I would definitely recommend that if you're not familiar with how shipwreck looks, not shipwreck, sorry, an oil spill, definitely go and Google images and you'll see how this poem really paints a beautiful and accurate picture of that. Well, maybe not beautiful, but you will understand from looking at those pictures what the speaker is trying to relate here. And so the enjambment over here shows how the oil just keeps on spreading and spreading. And remember how oil and water don't mix. So the oil is spreading and it doesn't ever absorb into the water. So it just keeps on sort of becoming worse and worse, just like the plight of the penguin keeps becoming worse and worse. We can also see this enjambment as a sense of a rushing, and the penguin seems to be rushing away from the oil. And we're going to see later he tries to sort of run away from his own habitat, run away from the sea because he's so traumatized from what has occurred from this oil spill. Has spread a deep commercial stain over his downy shirt front, sleazy, grey. It clogs the sleekness far too well. So in the second stanza, we continue on with this description of this environmental catastrophe that has happened, this oil spill that has deprived the penguin of his home and of his safety and of his environment. So has spread a deep commercial stain. So deep shows us, the diction deep shows this problem is not trivial or passing. It is deeply entrenched within society. Commercial shows us it's got to do with industry, it's got to do with business, and it has a connotation of being, sort of greedy, being about money that has caused this oil spill, has caused this penguin to lose everything. And the word stain is very important over here because a stain is something that lasts forever, right? It's not just a mark which you can get rid of. A stain is there forever. And so we can understand that literally and figuratively. So literally, the oil spill has created a stain because the penguin's feathers, as it says in the next line, the stain are over his downy shirt front. So the penguin's feathers are full of oil. But we can also see it figuratively, and we can see the figurativeness in the sense of man's selfishness and pursuit of industry is putting a stain on the environment, is putting a stain on humanity. Over his downy shirt front, downy means like fine, soft, white feathers. And you see how we are referencing, we're alluding back to that image of the coattails with the shirt front over here. So once again, reinforcing that, we need to empathize with the penguin and putting him sort of in the human image. Do you see the caesura again? Throughout this poem, you're going to notice all the caesura, all the enjambment, and it's the same sort of effect. The caesura slows the pace down, the enjambment quickens the pace, but moreover, the caesura really makes us, concentrate on what's being said and also emphasizes the unnaturalness of this oil spill and of the penguin's plight, whereas the enjambment shows him running away from the oil and the continuous nature of the oil spreading and this commercial stain growing. Sleazy. Sleazy means disreputable, grey. And grey is showing, how the white feathers have turned grey because they've got this oil that's soaking into them right now. And we can see sleazy as being obviously referring to the oil, but it can also refer to the humans themselves, right, who have commercially stained the environment. It clogs the sleekness. So the oil, the word clogs is a really strong word with lots of negative connotations, right? It's almost like the sense of blocking something. It's what it's done to the sleekness. This is the sleekness of what the penguin used to be, right? It used to be the sleek animal. Now it's all sticky and disgusting, and the feathers are not as sleek as they normally are. So we can see the effect of the oil spill, and you'll see this word is going to come up again. So a key aspect of this poem is repetition. You're going to see repetition of the same words and some similar figures of speech throughout the poem, and particularly the words. And the reason why this repetition is important is because it emphasizes how traumatized the penguin is by this event, that he can't seem to forget about it in any way. He just keeps reliving the same nightmare over and over again, which is very indicative of PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. Far too well, he must recall the past to be so cautious. Watch him step into the waves. He shudders under the froth, slides, slips on the wet sand. So he must recall the past. Here we see that his experience of this oil spill haunts him, and he must be so cautious. The word "so" shows the degree of caution which he needs to embody in order to cope, in order to deal with this. The colon at the end of this line shows us or indicates the start of a list, and now we're going to follow with an explanation of how he is being cautious. Watch him step into the waves. So here the speaker commands and demands the reader, includes the reader, and tells us that we must watch him, that we must look at this. And here it's creating a sense of responsibility among the reader, that we ourselves need to feel responsible. Look at what you've done to this penguin. And we're going to watch him as he steps into the waves. And then we have this full stop there. Like we said, that zero, that unnaturalness, it makes the reader reflect on the actions which have brought him here. It also slows the pace down to show how the penguin is being so careful. And as he tries to approach the waves, and remember, this is his home, this is supposed to be where he feels comfortable, in the waves, in the ocean, he shudders under the froth. So the water, his home, has become a threat, has become unnatural. If you shudder, you are sort of like involuntarily, you don't want to be involved in something, right? You shudder, you're so almost disgusted by it, or you're really, really scared. So he's going back away from the sea, and he slips on the wet sand. This sibilance, the repetition of the S sound, really emphasizes the hesitation, the fear, and the uncontrollable movements of the penguin. He feels so uncontrollable, and he reaches back towards the sand instead of going into the ocean. Escaping to dryness, dearth, in a white cascade, an involuntary shouldering off of gleam. Hands push him back into the sea. He stands. So over here, escaping to dryness, this is once again a contradiction, or it's a slightly paradoxical, because he's escaping from his own territory. He's escaping from his own, from the ocean, his home. And where is he escaping to? He's escaping to dryness, to dearth. Dearth means where there's a lack of food, or there's an inadequate environment, or a sense of emptiness. So he's going backwards towards the sand, and in reality that sand is not going to help him, right? And it's not going to provide the home that he needs, because he's so traumatized to re-enter his home after the oil spill has occurred. He is suffering from PTSD. He can't trust the sea anymore after the effect it's had on him. In a white cascade is almost this diction which shows passing, or like all of this sand. An involuntary shouldering off of gleam. Involuntary means automatic, and shouldering reminds me of shuddering in the previous stanza, right? The alliteration off of that F sound really emphasizes how he's trying to get rid of it. He's almost disgusted and struggling. He's trying to, even though he's now being cleaned up, he still feels like the oil is on him, and the gleam refers to the oil. And so his memory is influencing his reaction to the water. So even though now he's past the stage, he's been cleaned up, and he doesn't have the oil remnants anymore, he still feels like he's got them on, and he's still traumatized by that experience. Hands push him back to the sea. This is a really interesting line, because it uses synecdoche. So synecdoche in this case is when a part represents a whole. So obviously hands are connected to people, but it doesn't say that people push him into the sea. It shows hands push him into the sea. So these are the human rescuers. So after the oil spill has happened, there's been a whole bunch of people who have come to try and, solve the problem and get the oil out of the sea and help the animals who have survived. And they have cleaned up the penguin and they're pushing him back to the sea, pushing him back into his natural environment. But the way that we use the reason why we use synecdoche is to show it from the penguin's perspective. He can't distinguish between those who want to help him and those who don't, because ultimately it was humans who caused the problem in the first place, right? And so the hands show also a sense of how overwhelmed he feels. He doesn't see kind, friendly people trying to help him. He sees these hands pushing, forcing him back into the sea in a place where he doesn't feel safe. And these hands are sort of inhumane to him. They lack humanity because he doesn't show how they're connected to the people. He stands. Now, obviously, we spoke about enjambment, caesura, and everything, but I just think this is worth mentioning that he stands is right at the end of the stanza, and it's all alone. And this shows the penguins, it emphasizes the penguin's isolation. He's standing there by himself, alone, with all of these hands all around him, all of this chaos surrounding him. And he stands there in pained and silent expostulation. Once he knew a sunlit, leaping smoothness, but closed with his head small, knoll, and dark. So over here in this stanza, he stands there and he's in pain and he's refusing to go back into the ocean. And so he's taken this stance, but it's a silent stance. He's weak, he is vulnerable, he can't express his plight, he can't talk and express his distress. And so his resistance or his protest actually makes no impact, it makes no difference. Once he knew a sunlit leaping smoothness. So once, this is saying once upon a time, in the past, before all of this, he knew. We can see the past tense there. And then we have three words with really positive connotations: sunlit, leaping, and smoothness. The ocean was this beautiful place for him before all this pollution, before this oil spill, before humans started destroying the environment. The ocean has now changed for him. And we can see that with the use of but. But always shows a change of tone. And so now in this last line of the stanza, he is within his head and it's filled with dark thoughts. So a knoll is a rounded hill, so you can see the shape of a penguin's head is like a rounded hill. And if you think about dark, you can think of two meanings. It could mean the color of the feathers around the penguin's head, but it also shows us the dark thoughts and the memories that haunt him. And so it's a really ominous end to this stanza. He retains the image, oil on sea, green slicks, black lassos of sludge, sleeving the breakers in a stain-spread scarf. So in this first line of the stanza, he retains the image. Here we understand how the experience has really haunted him, that this image of the oil spill and his experience is, stays with him this whole time. And the colon indicates now we're going to hear what the image is, an explanation. And it's a very simple image, which I think is such brilliant writing. It's oil on sea. That's what we hear. That's enough to make this penguin just go, and go back in his head and think about, this entire experience, which really traumatized him. And you see, we have a lot of repetition. We've got lots of words, repeating. We've got oil and sea here. And as I said earlier, this repetition really emphasizes the idea that it's difficult for the penguin to overcome this memory, to get over this memory. It keeps coming back to haunt him. And the last two lines of the stanza are an example of imagery because the speaker paints a picture of the oil spill and how it looks. And if you go and have a look at a picture of an oil spill, you will see how sort of accurate this is and how, how this writing really does paint a picture of the actual event. So green slicks, black lassos of sludge. So notice that the alliteration or the sibilance of the repeated S sound and slicks, lassos, and sludge. It makes it really sound how you can really see how the oil captures the marine life, especially that use of lasso, right? So it's like a rope, a circular rope, and it catches the penguin, it catches the ocean, and it doesn't let it go. And sludge is a really terrible connotations of the word sludge. It's industrial waste and it's this oil spill. And if you think about sludge, it sticks, it clings to the ocean. And as we said, oil and water don't mix, right? So the oil is resting on top of the water, and it's providing, or it's like sort of making the water or making the whole sea sort of claustrophobic, and it's filling the sea with this really poisonous stuff. Now, in the last line, we have a very clever use of metaphor. We have sleeving and we have scarf, and these two ideas are both related to clothing. So sleeving, you think about like your sleeves. The breakers is referring to the heavy sea waves in a stain spread scarf. So here we have that sibilance again, this hissing sound showing a sense of disgust, and we have the repeated use of the word stain, that the effect of humanity on nature is like a stain, and it's spread all over. But the idea of the clothing, that it's like the oil is clothing the sea because the oil is resting on top of the sea, and so it's actually covering up the sea. So there's that metaphor of the clothing being so effective in conveying that imagery. He shudders now from the clean flinching wave, turns and plods back up the yellow sand, ineffably wary, triumphantly sad. So once again we have that word shudders. This shows how the penguin is scared of his natural environment. And he shudders, and as we've said, it's now been cleaned up. So the wave is not actually full of oil anymore. It's a clean wave. But that still makes him flinch because he still has the association with the oil spilled and the effect it had on the sea. If we look over here at clean flinching wave, this is an example of a transferred epithet. A transferred epithet is when you have an adjective that is transferred from the noun it's meant to describe to another noun. So it's sort of attached to a different noun. So in this case, the word flinching is actually supposed to describe the penguin and his reaction, and as his memory comes back to him, he sees the waves and he flinches. And as he moves away to avoid the wave because he's fearful. But in this case, it's actually describing the wave. And what the transferred epithet does is it really just emphasizes how fearful the penguin is and how much he's trying to avoid the wave. It's as though the wave is flinching itself. Turns and plods back up the yellow sand. So he turns away from the wave. He turns away from his home and he plods. If you think about the word plods, it has connotations of being unhappy, of moving slowly, of moving lethargically. And this line has a very heavy and melancholic tone, and he plods back up. If you think about walking up, it's an effort. So he's taking and making an effort to move away from his home because he's still so traumatized, up the yellow sand. And so in this stanza, we are really the reader is really sort of compelled to empathize with the creature's vulnerability. And this line is so beautifully written. Ineffably wary, triumphantly sad. So ineffably means indescribably. It's impossible to say in words. Wary means cautious. And then triumphantly sad is an example of an oxymoron where you have two opposite words next to each other. So his triumph of actually surviving the oil spill has made him really sad because now he has to deal with the PTSD. And so we are using a form of personification here as well because we are giving the penguin these human-like emotions. But that oxymoron is such a great sort of summary of how the penguin feels. And it emphasizes sort of how, torn he is in so many different ways. So he's torn in the sense of, he survived, but he's scared of, going back into the ocean. And he's also sort of torn between, well, not torn, but he's trying to get over his whole PTSD so that he can return to the life that he once used to lead. He is immensely wise. He trusts nobody. His senses are clogged with experience. He eats fish from the Saviour's hands, and it tastes black. So in this final stanza, he is immensely wise, and we have a colon, which indicates now we're going to understand why he is wise. He trusts nobody, which I think is such a depressing and sad line, that what makes him wise is the fact that he doesn't trust anyone. But what it's saying is that he learns from previous experience, and it is quite despairing. It is quite, a shocking line and pretty terrible to think of. He has an inability to trust now, and that inability to trust is seen as wisdom. His senses are clogged with experience. So obviously we can interpret experience as being positive or negative depending on the context. And in this case, it's definitely negative because his senses are clogged. They are damaged with experience, with the memory of the oil. And the repetition once again shows us how he's how he's so traumatized. And the word clogged, if your sink is clogged, for instance, it's not working. So it shows us how the penguin due to his experience, he now sort of isn't functioning properly. He's not functioning as a penguin should be. He eats fish from the savior's hands and it tastes black. So he doesn't respond naturally as he should to different things anymore. He's into his home. His memories prevent this. And he eats fish from the savior's hands. And this idea of savior, this is quite an important thing we need to analyze. So, firstly, we can see it as the savior meaning human beings, and we can see it's quite an ironic thing as well because mankind is responsible for destroying the penguin's environment, but now they're trying to help the penguin by, giving him fish. And we can also see how that fish would be, taste black. And the idea of it tasting black is because it could just be filled with the oil, still filled with the black oil of the oil spill. And so that's why it doesn't taste good. It tastes black. But also, if you think about it, it's not ideal for humans to be feeding penguins, right? Penguins should be able to have their environment, able to fish for themselves. And that's why it doesn't taste as good as it should, because it hasn't been derived in the correct manner. But the use of Savior's hands is also an allusion, and in this particular case, it's religious imagery. So it's a religious allusion. Allusion is a reference, and so here it references the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 with loaves and fishes, and so it's a really positive image of feeding the multitudes with little food. But for the penguin, as we said, it's actually ironic because, and as we see here, the savior is supposed to be good, but actually the fish doesn't taste good. It's because the people were the ones who actually caused the disaster in the first place. And so therefore, he can't be incredibly sort of happy about them now feeding him, because if it wasn't for them, he would still be living his normal life. So in terms of the structure and the form of the poem, it's free verse, there's no particular rhyme scheme. We have equal lined stanzas, which creates a sense of monotony, but we have a lot of caesura and enjambment, which we've discussed earlier in terms of what that connotes and emphasizes. The theme and message of the poem is environmental catastrophe, mankind's role in destruction, PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, and humans polluting nature. And the tone can be described as critical, melancholic, harsh, depressing, distressing, empathetic, impassioned, somber, and subdued, depending on the line that's been quoted. And the mood can be described as unsettling, destructive, despairing, and tragic. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video helpful. Please remember to like the video and to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.